Great, thank you all for coming. I'm Summer, I'm the curator here at the museum. Before we get started, a reminder to please turn off or silence your phone so we don't have any disruptions. We're kind of in the quiet period at the museum in terms of special programs, but I'm just going to do a quick plug for museum membership. If you're a fan of our programs, of course, brown bags are always free, but one of the perks of a membership is free admission to our third on thirds. So that's something to consider. We have the membership brochures at that back table if you're interested. As for upcoming programs, our January 3rd on 3rd on the 20th will be a film screening of the WJCT documentary An American Beach. The film focuses on Maveen Betch and the American Beaches community's efforts to protect the beach from development. That film was produced in the year 2000. Our February brown bag on February 1st will be with Richard Tim from the Amelia Island Whale Ambassadors, and he's going to be talking about right whales in our area. So that's it for our announcements, but today we have Lauree Hemke. Hemke is a member of the Amelia Island Quilt Guild and Studio Arts Quilt Association and has been creating handwork most of her life. She is an active Fernandina resident involved with the arts, dance, history, and conservation efforts that inspire her. Currently, she is the publicity chair for the Quilts by the Sea Quilt Show, held February 7th through 18th at the Rec Center, which she's going to be talking about more during her talk. So everyone, please welcome Lauree.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here and to do what I really enjoy doing, which is to brag about quilting and handwork and staying very active with that. So I'm going to flip slides real quick, or maybe not.
Did it? Hold on.
Uh-oh. I don't want too many tech. Okay.
Yeah.
Yay! Okay. All right. So just to reiterate just a little bit, so I am the publicity chair for the Quilt Show and for the Quilt Guild, which is February 17th and 18th. I'm also a member of SAQA, which is Studio Arts. And I think what that tells you about many of us is that we have in this modern world really gone a little bit beyond some traditional quilting, which most of us are very accustomed to. So just so that you know a little bit about what we're going to be doing today, we're going to talk about some quilting facts because I like facts. I like that. A little bit of the history of quilting. We're going to really capture just some of the reasons of why we quilt in a modern world. And we're going to share some techniques that are really visible in our challenge quilts, which I'm going to talk about, and then discuss what to look for when you come to the show on February 17th and 18th, some of the things to look for. We will, towards the end, have time for questions and answers. We'll also have an opportunity to look at the challenge quilts. The only thing that I ask is that food and art quilts don't play nicely together, so I would just ask that you not touch those. As we say with the 2-year-olds, look with your eyes. And the back, I know, it's like we're all regressing, but, and the back quilt is a raffle quilt. So I'll be selling raffle tickets if you're interested. It will be awarded Saturday, February 18th, I think, towards the end of the show. And it's part of our big money making. So we do the show every 3 years. So, I did it. I knew I was going to do it too, because I had to do it. Okay, so a little bit of facts. Okay, so I'm often asked this kind of question. So the money end of it, the economy part of it. North America has, that's just North America, right? 9 to 11 million quilters. 98% of us are female, 65% are retired. The age span really is mid-40s to old. But what we're seeing more and more is a lot of younger people that are quilting. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the what we call the modern quilters a little later. You can see the size of the quilting market. I mean, just check that out. And that includes the fabric, the thread, the tools that we use, and the patterns. It's always amazing to see what tools we use. Like I was just saying to somebody, I have 3 irons because it depends on what kind of seam that I'm doing. I'm not going to tell you, look at you nodding, I'm not going to tell you about scissors and cutters. I can't even go there. And then there's the rulers, which now have their own special rack. That may speak more about me than the rest of the world, but since there's knives, I don't think I'm by myself. The sewing machine market, check that out. It's expected to grow to $4.66 billion in 2022. So we love our technology, our equipment. And then I think everybody in here knows exactly what a quilt is, but it's basically 3 layers. I'll just show, I actually did a presentation recently and people weren't real sure about this, so I'll just show it to you. But quilting is just very simple. Here's one that's almost finished. You got your piecing, your batting, and then your backing. So this is just Lauree playing around with a shorebird during a hurricane. And this is just the same kind of thing. You just take the fabric, you cut it apart, and then you sew it back together, right? We'll find out why. Right? A lot of people envision quilt guilds or quilt groups, but we really do a lot of work in what I call alone time. A lot is going into that space, whether it be a card table, your sewing room, your utility room. And in that room, we're dreaming, we're designing. We take a lot of pauses, put that project down, go to another. Don't ask how many projects are in the closet waiting to be. But then we're like everybody else, we take a lot of time to be together. And just like those old quilting bees, we gather together to finish it up. So we're really proud of our community and how we support each other. But there's still that question of, why don't we just go to Target and just buy?
That's a good question.
Walmart, Target, wherever. Why don't we do that? In part is because it's just magical. Is just absolutely magical, which you can kind of see here and you'll see at the big show. To be able to practice something that traces way back. You want to know how far back? The oldest quilt that we can document is during the Egyptian period of time. So we're doing something that connects. It's also a very diverse kind of art. And it is also in all cultures. So wherever you go, you're going to see quilting. That same layer after layer and putting together. Probably one of the oldest forms is what we call applique. We would see that in colonial times, plantation times, where a wealthy woman would ask for 1 yard of fabric from England, maybe France, bring it back. She'd take a look at it, cut it apart, and then have her workers or her slaves sew it back together on what we call a whole cloth. But that practice is still going on. And we also would find some of that in our clothing from all cultures. First reference of quilting was found in a sea captain's list of objects in Salem. So, of course, none of that is available to us now. So as you can hear, what I'm talking about is connecting with history. It's a great place to be talking about that, correct? Mm-hmm. It's a universal symbol of comfort and warmth. It's really made for joy. You know, again, going back to the 3 layers. And this is something that we're doing a much, much better job of studying. So, most people say, oh, my great-grandmother made a quilt for utility reasons. But I always say, but let's think about that. She still was cutting fabric apart and putting it together. She still was following a pattern. She still was thinking long and hard about colors and what goes together and values. So we may have said, I'm giving you something to stay warm. And where is it, Minnesota?
Wisconsin for her.
You know? But it was really more to it than that, you know. There was still a lot of thought and creativity that was going through. Quilting flourished in America between 1825 and 1875. It's when we started getting calico fabrics, okay? Quilting guilds, quilting bees, I talked about that. You know when that got started? When we were traveling west. So we're in the wagons and we need a quilt. And it's hard to quilt those big ones on hand by yourself. And we lived so far away from each other that we had to find a way to help each other. And that's when the friendships and the conversations and all that would exchange, okay? We also started using quilts then to cover our doors. It's cold, right? It's cold. And the floors, and children started playing under the quilts. I have nephews that are still talking about, you know, playing under the quilt that I made for their parents as a wedding gift, you know, whatever. Let's see. All right, I'm going to do it correctly. I do want to show, just point out, I could use my stick, but I won't. That pattern that you see up there, that is actually from a modern day book, but it's one of the oldest patterns that we find. And if people are not, and actually you can see some of that in the raffle quilt when you go back there. We also quilt, did I already do this one? Mm-hmm. Because it just feels good to connect with generations, okay? The quilt world started plummeting a little bit. Then it started catching on again in the 1930s, which is kind of interesting when you think about what's going on in history then. It's really, you're talking about depression, and how do we deal with that? We pick up our quilting and we pick up our creativity. It's also when some of the patterns were becoming more popular. We had different ways of getting patterns out to people. Before the 30s, the fabric was rather boring. So now we've got the calicos, so people are becoming, more interested. Okay. This is, again, another pattern that people often ask me about. Is a wedding ring. Where people talk about, oh, my grandmother gave me a wedding ring or a basket. This was real popular. So popular, as a matter of fact, that we almost lost the art of quilting because everybody was doing those patterns. So we almost in the 50s just totally lost it. But thankfully we got creative yet again. We also, during that era, started having sewing machines. Yay! Now we've got some technology that's going to make our art a little bit better. And we quilt to explore, back to the cutting fabric. Think about the little kids in school, how they take paper and cut it apart and put it back together. Apparently we don't ever grow up. Okay, so we do the same thing. There is a thrill that is almost hard to imagine unless you're there of a new project. You know, I was talking to some people yesterday and I said, well, I have this in my head and I have this in my head and I need this and this one's really got to come out. But I guess I better go grocery shopping. So, you know, it helps to find some balance with all that. It's fun, like I was doing with my shorebird, playing with colors, you know, to see how they blend together or don't. It's okay to make mistakes. And it's just fun watching it come out of your head. It's just a process, and it's just a process, and it's just a journey. We quilt because we are in a digital age, and we are looking for ways to connect. It's a very fast-paced world. But when I'm quilting, I slow it down. You know, if people are nodding their heads, you just slow it down. We know that we can find things cheaper in other places, but this is more fun. I think one of the most exciting things about quilting is giving that gift to somebody. So when I talked about my niece, and now the kids are 14 still playing under the quilt, there's something about that relationship now that I have with her and the kids, you know? So it's something about as soon as I give it to you, whether it be a wedding or a baby, I'm honoring that special occasion. What you do with that is what you do with that. But to me and to quilters, we're honoring that special moment. But it also, what does it do to that relationship? My niece and I had that starting point. We have that continual carrying on. And she knows now that my great-grandmother did handwork, and that I'm passing that along so that it continues. So here's the other thing. We quilt to express ourselves. Sometimes we forget about that, but there's often issues that are going on in our head that have to come out. And quilting is a way for it to come out. I would confess that I hadn't really thought about it to just this moment. My shorebird with the purple sky was the first hurricane that I went through here. And the sky was purple, and I didn't know, that it was purple. And then I was worried about the birds. So this was just plain, somebody made it. So this is, it just had to come out, that concern. We quilt to embrace what else is going on in the world. So we may have issues here on Amelia Island, but we also know that there's other issues that we want to process and to get out. One of the things that we are beginning to do as quilters is to recognize that we're artists. Back to, we could just get you an army blanket and say, Merry Christmas or whatever. We're now recognizing that we might want to start labeling our work on the front. If you think about going to a museum and people are nodding, and you think about the art, Van Gogh's name is right there up front, right? We put ours on the back, So many of the studio art associations are really pushing for us to start putting on the front. And even if it's not a label, putting a little symbol, something that makes it yours, that is really clear. And I think what all of us do, especially when we're getting ready to go to a quilt show or showing our work, is acknowledging that some people are going to love what we do and some are not. And that's not always easy as an artist, to do that. But at the same time, we will be the first ones walking around at the show listening to what you're saying. Oh, she didn't like that. I'm gonna remember that. I think I pretty much talked about this, but this is important to the Amelia Island Quilt Guild and all guilds. We really do a lot of quilting to protest. That's the truth. You know, we have things to say. We also, like I said, we got to just get this stuff out of, we definitely need to get it out of my head. But it also raises awareness. And what I have found through my life as a quilter is quilt guilds take on the needs of a community. For example, there's a quilt guild that's a big quilt guild that knows the community that they're in. Most of the children are in poverty. So they do a show every November and December, and they have made small objects for the kids to buy for 50 cents or $1. I know, you know, and that because they've recognized the need of the community. So you hear that all the time. Our need, for example, is we got connected I'm not even sure when, with community hospice and the Council on Aging. So that says a lot about us. Last year, we made 430 quilts.
My brother-in-law received one of those quilts when he was in hospice care, and it was beautiful.
Yeah, we've expanded. We're doing. I have to share that because that's exactly what we get. Lots of thank yous. Council on Aging, Habitat for Humanity. When there's a new house, that owner gets a quilt, and we're very proud of that work. We're proud of it, but we also just do it. We did the same number of quilts during the pandemic. The group found a way to keep that mission going. We recognized right off the bat with the pandemic that masks needed to be made. I walked into the city clerk's office for something. They didn't have masks and couldn't find them. Went home and made them. You know, you just do what your community needs. During the suffrage movements, just so that you can see that it's historical, how do you think women funded that movement? Quilts, sold quilts. I know, the little things in history, right, that you find out. I want to check my time. I think we're okay. The creation process, I talked a little bit about that, especially in the world where we have all the media coming at us. It can both stimulate us, but it can also be overwhelming. So we take care of that. There's also, not surprising, as you would find in any sport, there's a hierarchy of skills. Yeah, there's a big hierarchy of skills, you know, and you can see that in quilt shows, you can see that wherever. But for us, we welcome any skill level, and we're happy to work with the beginner. And actually, even in our more complex, we have a number of professional quilters in the guild, and you really wouldn't know it, but they sit right beside me, right beside me, or on this side, just kind of coaching me along, you know. So we coach each other. Sometimes I coach them too. It's all right. And then, let me stop right here to see if there's any questions about the history or quilting at this point.
I just wanted to say something. One of my friends back in high school, her grandmother had a quilt that they used during the Underground Railroad. They would put those out, and that's how you knew where to go. And I thought, what a wonderful thing to do.
Yes. I actually have to tag along on that. When I lived in North Carolina, there were these large boards that became popular, and we were researching and we wanted to have one made. put on our house, but the history was that if you saw that on a barn, that
You
was
were
the place
safe
to
to
go.
go there.
Yeah.
I will tell you that, there's a lot of controversy with those stories, so you
I
can
can
read.
imagine.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
so
sure,
you-
I'm
so you
sure.
can read just as much the other
Yeah.
way. However, what you
Urban legend.
did was,
Yeah, exactly.
but what you did was do exactly what we do. We are full of stories, and wherever I go, and I start talking about quilting, somebody will tell me, when I was 2 years old, I'm stuck on 2 today. When I was 6 years old, my great grandmother, blah, 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 blah. And we love those stories.
Oh, yeah.
We are so excited when people tell us those stories. And it's again, back to the relationship. You know, you've got that common conversation, which in today's world, we're often looking for. Something that we have in common. Oh, yes, I have a quilt that was my grandmother's, and I assumed it was this grandmother, and I just had it checked out, and it's from the other grandmother. It's those kinds of stories that make it fun, you know. Anything else? I often get asked, where do we quilt? And I may have touched on that. When I first started quilting, I used a card table. And I have a couple of friends that use their utility rooms. Now I have a bedroom that's now my sewing room, but my husband would tell you the whole house is finished. But he's not here.
I understand there's a lot of different machines nowadays. My sister-in-law, or my former sister-in-law, anyway, I love irises, so she made me a quilt that's different with irises,
Yes.
and then sewed the pattern of the iris on the quilt.
Yes.
It was just fascinating
Yeah,
to see.
yeah, it's stunning. Yeah, I love those. Sounds like it's a little bit of applique. Yeah. So, all right. So the reason why we are with the museum is because we're very excited about our challenge quilts. Now we do challenge quilts a lot in Quilt Guilds, and it's really what stretches you. So we did one year that was all about bindings. I'll show you what a binding is if you don't know. So all different ways that we can, you know, finish a quilt. We did one last year called Childhood Games. You know, so people did hopscotch, I did chasing bubbles, so, you know, so we do these things to stimulate us and to also push your skill set. So for me, I might be real comfortable just sewing my little squares together, but the challenge quilts sends you over, right, sends you over. So because it's the year 2023, we have the challenge quilt of 8 Flags over Fernandina 2023. So all the quilts, the first criteria, everything had to be 20 by 23 or smaller. Okay. So that's small, right? Because you're used to that size, right? So you had to do your thinking in a smaller scale. And then 8 Flags over Fernandina. That's pretty incredible. So we had Summer to come to one of our meetings later, and she gave us the history of the 8 Flags. And then you could really see the brains going. You know, oh, so what's my favorite flag? What was my favorite story? And that was really fun because wherever you went, it went like this. Have you started on your challenge? Have you started on your challenge? And what are you going to do? It was that kind of thing. We did research. We came here. We went to the library. Very grateful for 2 bookstores that have lots of books on the history. As you can tell, when you look at these, I'll go in a little bit more detail. We had people that took pictures of downtown and incorporated. We had people that went to Kingsley Plantation. We had people that met with the churches, went to the lighthouse, of course. So you can see that there a lot went on. And just like with the big quilts, you had to come up with a pattern. It's not like you could just start throwing fabric onto that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the one that I did because it's easier for me to talk about that process and not assume, what other people did. So with mine, can I walk over there and the little fellow will still follow me? Yeah. Okay. So this is mine. So it's not that I'm looking for anything other than just to tell you the process. So I started off with the Green Cross of Florida. And why would anybody stay on this island for just a couple of months? I mean, really. And that's what Gregor McGregor did. He stayed here in 1817 for about a couple of months. And I said, well, and green, by the way, is my favorite color. I was like, well, that does that. Then I drew it out how I wanted it. I wanted my flag to be on front. It's on the back because I didn't want to be kicked out of the group for that reason. Don't go there. So there's my green cross. And then I started reading about this little guy who, as it turns out, if you Google 10 worst crooks ever, he's right up there in the top 5, often number 1. He is, what's the word? I think downstairs it says incorrigible. I mean, he's really a total rascal, fascinating. So he captures the island. He has about 50 soldiers, not many. Captures the spot, which is now where Old Town Fernandina is. And he tries to make money by making you wear his crest, and you're going to pay him money. And they eventually went, I'm not playing with you. So he leaves. So that's why he leaves. But in the meantime, he still is pretty much a scramble. He runs a slave trade. And for me, I knew that we had slave trades on the island. I knew, but I found out a lot more. So this is actually A1A. It goes to Jacksonville, which is where he wanted the slaves to go. And he also went up to St. Mary's. So it was a very lucrative trade. Then some people in the room know that I'm really into trees, so I had to put a tree in there. That's the alley, a tree is used or birds and things like that. So here we go. And then I was invited to the Middle Passage dedication at the old park. And I ended up redesigning it yet again because I realized that the water was a significant part of the history. I was just doing the park. I added the water and I had to have the boat. So the boat, came on. Now, what it is that you're going to see in all of these is that there's a lot of texture. So what I think separates quilters and fiber artists from painters is often the texture. So if you look at this quilt, you can see the movement, and it's part the colors, but it's also part the texture. And that's why I told you can't touch. Because you really do want to reach out and do it. This has cheesecloth, burlap. The fabric is printed from a slave sale from that period. And my thanks to the museum, they gave me a copy so I could print it on there. And then that's an old map. In this one, you can see the lights and think about choosing the fabric that would let the light shine through, again, that texture. This one, well, let me stop a minute. All of this around the edge, for those that don't know, that's called the binding. So normally you have to find a way to end it. It needs a beginning, but it also needs to have an ending. this one has applique in it. When you were talking about the flowers, right? It's most likely the same process. When we talked about the cost of quilts, I didn't know tell you how much they cost. And the fabric, I mentioned threads. Whoa, my goodness gracious, threads. So when you look at the quilts and you look at how they're finished, you can see the amount of threads that have gone into a lot of them. These are good examples right here where you can actually see the quilting, and the quilting actually highlights the fabric and highlights the design. Okay. That's actually pretty visible in all of these. Like this shows the movement. You know, I don't want to tell you too much what to look for, but this shows the movement of the water and the clouds. The other thing about this one is many of us are into what's called collage quilting. It's very similar to impressionistic art. This is actually, let me do it. These pieces are pieced, so I bet someone's actually taken two pieces and they've sewn them together. These pieces are actually butting against each other. And they're often very small pieces that blend in together. And the way we hold that together is through quilting, of course, but also what's on top of this, and give me a minute, I'll find that one. Maybe I won't. On top of this, this one down here, thank you, is netting or tulle, like you find in a bridal gown, right? Bridal. So that is holding all of that together, those little pieces, so they don't fall apart. But it also changes the colors. So I might, when I do mine like this, I might have 4 or 5 different pieces of tulle that I keep auditioning, and those are actually the words that we use to see which one creates the effect that I want. Not what you want, what I want. And you can tell with this one and some of the others how tight the stitching is, and that goes back to how much thread we're using, but also that our machines are doing what we call proper tension, because you don't want your threads bubbling up. You want them to hold together. This is a good example of piecing, and this one very small scale. So imagine piecing, little pieces. Gotta have good eyes. This is what's called the Mariner's Compass. It's a very famous pattern that a lot of people refer to. And the artist with this one thought that was a good way to display all the ships and everything that's coming into. This is Kingsley Plantation. This is another, when you get close to it, you can see how the fabric it actually helps to tell the story. So it's similar to painting in that way, where when you get up on it, you see the little pieces, you get a different feel for it. So when you come to the quilt show, these will be on display. I will tell you that during the quilt show, the quilts are judged, so we bring in a judge. These will be judged, but they're also being judged now by the staff from the museum, because they were so helpful. So that's good. And then on the show, we also have a viewers award, so when you go through, you can participate in that way. So I do want you to be able to walk around and look at them and see if you have any questions about them. Do you have any questions at this point? While you're thinking, because the teacher in me says I have to give you wait time. We have quite, I know, it's like you're telling yeah, I don't make it, yeah.
Usually, how many thread counts do you usually do for for an inch? What do you usually put your machine on? Like how many stitches? 2.5 usually. That's what most of these are, you think? Cause I just love the texture they've done into the,
For piecing, not, you're talking
That's for
piecing.
piecing.
I'm talking about quilting.
It's all different because like some of it is free motion, what they call free motion. So with that, you're literally building your muscles here, I will tell you, and you're doing like this. So sometimes, depending on the effect, the stitches might be bigger.
Okay.
So, and we take a lot of training.
Yeah, cause that's
you know,
harder than it
for
looks.
motion. And then I don't know enough about long arm quilting to answer what the stitch length is. But you can tell if it's too big, and you can tell, yeah, you can tell. I do a lot of practicing, so I have big pieces that I just pull out and practice.
Do you usually use a cotton batting, or does it matter?
Well, we could do another hour on that.
Well, I usually just get what's on
It
sale.
was a great, I was like, oh man. 2 hours later.
Okay. That down
Is it
rabbit
cotton
hole.
thread or embroidery or polyester or not on thread? I would say most of us use cotton, but for things like this, we often use wool because wool shows the texture.
Okay, that's a good, okay.
And I was gonna ask you about the thread, so do you use just regular thread, polyester thread to piece it together before you start trying to?
Remember when I talked about the skill set?
Yeah.
But there's also what in Atlanta we call a woody tree part of it too. So yeah, we go and buy threads, but as your skill set changes, you start buying.
Well,
Go ahead, you laugh, but don't come to my house and just see the threads. You become more, you start buying different, there's actually called weights. So
Right.
my bobbin thread might be one weight and my top thread is a different weight. So
Okay.
that they come so that
I
you
use the
don't
same
work that out.
thread for everything.
Yeah, so, yeah, weight is all that, yeah, so, and, yeah, so.
and you can look at it and see the difference.
You can look at it and, like I have some threads that I want to glisten, so when I'm doing,
Don't get this.
water scenes, I will try
Oh,
different threads that will pick up the light and reflect. In this one, you can see a little bit of those glistening, and then on this one, I also did hand stitching too, so there's a lot of that. This one.
You know, the thread in that one is very unique. What is that? That's a.
This is probably that big spool thread, right?
There's something that almost looks like there's beads on it.
Yes. Yeah, did she use that? I can touch it. I'm allowed to. Yeah, this has a little, if you get your eyes up on this does have a little glisten to it. Your eyes are better than mine. Yeah, you can get up on it, but you may not touch it.
I'll say, when I pieced, I was piecing something very, very small, so I used 100 weight thread, because when I used 50 weight, it was taking up too much space. The 100 weight's really fine, the thread machine looks like you're threading with a hair.
Yeah.
But I would never use it for piecing a thing that somebody's got sleeve under or launder or anything like that.
Right, yeah, and I have, a piece that I use silk thread, because I wanted it to be really, really fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's true, yeah.
Do most of them have hand stitching in addition to machine, or mostly just machine?
I think most of these are machine. When I looked at them before, this one has hand. I think this one. No, she used the machine to tack these on. Some people would have tacked those on by hand. She does a lot of hand work normally. So some of these I know the quilters have figured out. You know, I cheated because I can do that. But I think the only one is that.
Up at the top, there's hand stitching, it looks like she did her lettering at least by hand.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, that's, And she's got a little cat. Yeah, sometimes when you get up on them, you can see something that the person, that really makes that quilter stand out. Like, you know, I confess with my trees, and you might notice in this one, a little cat.
So would you call that like embroidery on top of it, or is it still just quilting?
Yeah. Yeah. And some shows would call this a mixed media because it's quilting and embroidery. So when you come to our show, you'll see the different categories. A lot of it is size. A lot of it is one of the categories is modern. And modern, as you could see, I hope from that picture, maybe old patterns, so it's still the structure, but more space. You know, sometimes it's the colors, you know, more solid colors. But that's a really good question. Some of the other, you know, because it's different size quilts. You know, like this one is, I'm supposed to know, but I don't know how big this one is. But if you have a baby, I'll give you a baby quilt. It's not that big. Yeah. And we do postcards, greeting cards, pet beds.
Wow. So I see some of the material is kind of unique.
Yeah,
You
we
used to
have,
have to special order that,
well,
or
we
you
have,
have
I'm glad you said that. We have fabric issues. Fabric issues that we are trying, that we don't work through, we just deal with it. So, during the pandemic, we did order a lot online. You can see how much money we spend on fabrics. There are fabric shops, in St. Mary's, Kingsland area, shops in Jacksonville that we go to. And sometimes what happens, which is why I'm glad you brought it up, sometimes some of us find fabric that we just fall in love with and you have to have, and it makes no sense in any pattern, it goes with nothing. But you just gotta have them. And what that means is that you take it out every once in a while and you just stroke it. You just, I know, it sounds terrible. And so it's a great question. There are quilt shops, sadly, are closing. You know, it's a very, very difficult business to be in. But the world of ordering online is doing well, which was not the prediction when you look at the age of the quilters. So it's been a surprise.
Yeah.
And the other surprise was people used their quilt shops to learn techniques, and you would go to, when we had lollipops here, we would go to that shop. Many of us, particularly during the pandemic, became YouTube junkies, you know, kind of thing. So I've taken classes now from a woman in Australia, you know, out west, that kind of thing, that I never would have had that opportunity, you know, so, and it, you know, so you just learn to do, and they have the technology where they will, you set up your camera on your computer where they can see what you're doing and give you feedback right then. Whereas if you took a class with 20 to 25 people, you might not get that much attention. So it's the kind of thing, and you just have to try it and see if that works for you. Some people say, no, I didn't like it at all. But that's a great question. It's like we're moving into, you know, a modern world. So I'll see you on the 17th and 18th. So what else? What other questions do you have?
Do you have anyone that does quilt restoration in the guild?
No, we don't.
Restoration.
It's not easy work, for one thing, and when we put it out there, so usually I'm the one that feels that kind of question. If I put it out there, people don't jump at it. And there's also some, I want to say not controversy, but kind of controversy about it. So some quilters, especially the ones that, you know, do some authenticating of quilting, say don't touch it because you're taking away from the historical part of it. But some people acknowledge that, well, my great-great-great-grandmother did this and I want it for prosperity. So, I mean, that's a long answer to your question. So, yeah, but I think as a family, you have to think about that before you just put the question out.
It's like cutter quilts and the controversies over using them as clothing, or do you preserve them and let them sit and be looked, or do you fashion them into something else? Is that okay?
Yeah. I think in the long run, it's all going to be okay, whatever, because you've taken the time to think about it, to really appreciate what the value of it was, you know, and especially in a world that really is focusing, particularly now, on minimalism, that we have to accept that the next few generations may not allow those kinds of things, except my niece and, well, I gave her, she found, you know. Anything else? Y'all ask great questions.
You gotta agree, it was a great class.
Yeah.
So we meet on Thursdays, once a month, at Prince of Peace Church from 6 when we start gathering, 6:30 to 8:30. We usually have a speaker or some sort of a presentation, always looking to improve or think about our skill set. We have on Tuesdays our community outreach group. So we do take donations of fabric, we take donations of batting, and that's how we keep, you know, the quilts going to those organizations. I take the scraps and we make the pet beds or whatever. So we're big into environmentalists, save the whatever. And we do quilt retreats. We think we're fun. And what else can I tell you about?
Which Thursday is it?
It's the
Second
Second
from tomorrow.
Thursday. I'll be here.
So it's a
Yes.
week from tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. And we try to put it in the paper.
And you have a website.
Yeah. We try to put it in the paper. It's free for, you know, to come and try it, whatever skill set. You know, when I came here, I had only made a couple of quilts and people just encouraged me to come, and I wouldn't show anything. It was just because this group is quite talented and quite skilled, so I still sit and draw, you know. But it's a good group. We have bookmarks in the back. If you want to take one and remind yourself that you will be coming to the show. For summer. Summer's coming. And I want to thank the museum again. I really do appreciate you having us, but also getting us to this point. You know.
Yeah.
They turned out really cool.
Yeah, it did.
Are you gonna put out a new challenge for some of the flags that weren't picked up on?
Probably not. There may be, we're still accepting challenge quilts, so if you would like to make one, which one is missing? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that was a Union Jack one.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of color to it.
Yes.
I'm surprised somebody didn't pick up on that one.
Yeah.
I thought the American one, the one on the lamppost there, just got it.
Yeah. Seems like the Union Jack, wasn't there one more? I didn't think. This is the French.
We haven't put the one on the back on our label.
Yes, all the labels on the back, we stand up.
But that's
Let
the
me
one
see.
we're referring to.
I don't remember if I put a label on it, but the picture of it.
Island Spanish also. So if you look at this one, you can see, well, there's a lighthouse right there. There's one.
And the island.
And the island, yeah. Gotta have the island.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to put the flags with the ones that are represented.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's probably gonna be displayed differently during the show, you know, would be my guess. This is, make it transportable.
Well, thank you so much.
Please feel free